amplification is not working quite as well, just raise your hand and say, turn it up, step it up, get louder. Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Bobby Krause, for hosting this again. I was here last year. I talked about canker and greening, HLB, last year, but I'm not apt to talk about canker today, and I think the reason is that the focus should be on the ball that's the biggest one to keep your eye on, but I don't want to take the eye off the canker ball either, because last spring we had a dry spring. And you get into that comfort zone, well, everything I did last year worked. Well, there was a reason. Because it didn't rain at the right time. The year before, in the same block where we did our trial, it was a disaster. Last year, we couldn't find canker in June. So don't take your eye off the little ball, but we're going to put our eye on the one we should, and the priorities we should be talking about right now are greening and HLB effects on trees that we see this year on our groves. The title might seem a bit strange to you because it doesn't have HLB in it, or greening, and that's because water and the way we've been managing our citrus groves for the last 50 years is now coming to be known as something that is increasing the effect of HLB, and we didn't have to really worry about that. It was happening before, but it's happening now, and we're noticing it now because of HLB and its effects on trees. And I'm going to try to explain as well as I can in this short time I have here why that's occurring. Why are fruit falling off trees? So I'm going to start with what I call Soil and Water 101. And it's not my talk. This is Kelly Morgan's talk that I cribbed from the Citrus Institute a couple weeks ago. And tomorrow or next week at Florida Ag Institute, I'll give you the same talk. So if you don't want to go and listen to me next week, fine. But if you want to go and listen to something you may have asked me about or told me about, I'm probably going to cite you, any one of you that has an observation that can help me further my topic. So don't be surprised if your name comes up, or at least your observation does next week, because I want to learn from you today as well as be the person giving the information. I'd like feedback as well, so I hope we have time for that. So we're talking about bicarbonates like we never have before, and somebody said yesterday, well, I can't even say the word bicarbonate. Carbendazine, I learned the word carbendazine last year, but bicarbonate's the word or the buzzword this year. And why is that? We never talked that much about bicarbonates before. They're what are in our well water. If we have a deep well, you've got bicarbonates. Chances are you've got high bicarbonates. Chances are that's linked with high pH, or relatively high. That would be pH 7.5 or higher. So if I don't say it enough times, go out and measure what your well water status is. That's absolutely first principles you need to know to think about what I'm talking about today and whether it's important in your grove or not. If you don't know that piece of information and want to get it, you send your sample off to a good soil chemical analysis. We use Waters Lab in Georgia, but you can use local folks as well for water testing. But do that first, and you need to know what you're dealing with here. We know that bicarbonates, because of the way we irrigate now, started irrigating about 30 years ago with microjets, is being concentrated on this small zone under the tree. Usually about 40 to 60% of the tree is irrigated with this water, and so it's accumulating in this zone. It's accumulating just like salinity accumulates on the East Coast. You've all heard the story about when it starts to rain on the East Coast, everybody cheers because the trees green up, things improve really quickly because all those salts get flushed out of the system. And that's what's happening with bicarbonates. They build up during the irrigation season when you're irrigating and it's not raining and you're only depending on irrigation to supply the tree with water. Those bicarbonates build up to a high level, and that's why you're measuring these pHs in the wetted zone of 7.5, even higher. And you're going, wow, I never measured the pHs so high as now compared to the past. Well, this is an accumulative effect, so it might even have to do with what time of the year you measure. If you measure at the end of the irrigation season, you may measure a very high pH. If you measure after the rainy season, you may get a much different answer. So when you're measuring your pH in the wetted zone, that's probably the second most important thing for you all to measure if you want to know what this all means to you in your grove, is measure it after your irrigation season, measure it in the wetting zone, don't measure it at the drip line, or make sure whoever is collecting the samples from your grove is doing this. So get the right piece of information. We have have information, we have databases, but they go back to the old days when we measured pH in drip line. Drip line measurements are not it. You need to have it in the wetted zone. And you need to know, and you or whoever's taking that sample need to know that that's the place you need to sample. Bicarbonate levels, what do they mean? I mean, what's high bicarbonate? Well, Brian Belcher Davis Management have shared all their bicarbonate measurements, all their pH measurements, all their nutritional measurements, soil and tissue. And what we find clearly is that when the pH is above 7.5, that's high bicarbonates. pH below, low bicarbonates. Deep well water, high bicarbonate. Shallow well water, low bicarbonate. It's that, there's that dichotomy. So it's not really that difficult to predict whether your grow is going to have high bicarbonates or not, but still, having said that, you need to measure it. What does bicarbonate do? Well, I think what it does is something that we really, it's kind of a thing we tolerate, we haven't thought about, we just live with it. It does things like occupy the soil's ions that we use to feed the tree, the magnesiums, the potassiums, as well as the calciums are tied up by bicarbonate. So you've got all these nutrients that are kind of taken out of the soil solution and attached to carbonate, and that carbonate is not allowing those nutrients to get into the tree. So carbonates, first and foremost, are tying up nutrients. Secondly, what they're doing is affecting the tree's ability to uptake these nutrients. Somehow, we don't know yet, but we're going to get right on this, I can promise you. Carbonate screws up the ability of the root to either clearly distinguish what nutrient it needs to take up, and then having distinguished it, it somehow fouled up how it gets into the tree, how well it gets into the root and then into the tree. So it's messing with selectivity, and it's messing with maybe the uptake process, and I would even add that maybe it's somehow reducing the amount of water that roots can take up. Now, Kelly Morgan and I, and Kelly is the co-author of this presentation today, all the stuff that's labeled here, all the pages labeled with UF-IFAS at the bottom with the logo are his slides that, again, I cribbed from the Citrus Institute. He's the chemist, and he's telling us that it's not only what's in the soil that's being tied up, it's what gets into the tree is being tied up, fouled up, and maybe even in addition to that, the water uptake. And so we have HLV-affected trees, and we're irrigating more than before because we have less roots, and I'll talk about that shortly. But with less roots working less well, it maybe takes more water as well as more nutrients to get things into the tree that we need to feed the tree. So a little bit of chemistry. We're talking about when we took chemistry in college. It's not an easy course. It's something that comes up from time to time we have to review. Well, the chemistry of the pH of the water and carbonates is that at high pH, highest pH, the carbonate is in that carbonate form, CO3, double minus. And the pHs that we measure in your well water, somewhere around 7.5 to 8.5, it's in the bicarbonate form, and that's the form I said is screwing up everything. And then at the more acid pH form, and I would say that would be 6.5 and below, it's there as carbonic acid. So it's actually an acidified form of carbonate that can be taken readily up by the tree, not cause a foul up in the calcium uptake and magnesium and so forth. So the low pH is favoring the right kind of carbon CO3 in the soil, and the high pH is favoring the worst form of that. And again, all this fouls up water uptake, nutrient uptake, and maybe water uptake as well. So on the next page, next slide, you see the chemistry of that, the chart that says where the pH changes, the form of carbonate changes, or CO3 changes. Now, I've got references at the bottom. This is all now. This isn't news. This is stuff that's been in bulletins and taught for years. It's just now our attention can't be brought to these things quickly enough because of what's changed out there, and that is the health of our trees. So again, high pH, high bicarbonates. There are levels of bicarbonate that are tolerable and ones that aren't. I would say you don't worry so much about that. You look at that three classes of carbonates, as I said, 0 to 100, low, 100 to 150 or 200, medium, and then above that, very, very high. And a lot of the carbonate levels are coming in the high, the medium to high range. And that's the prevailing situation across the state, not just here. So you know bicarbonates, or you know calcium carbonates as being the reason your irrigation systems foul up. And every once in a while you inject some uric acid to clean out the scum or the particulate or whatever it may be that clogs up your system. Now you don't use your system 24/7. Well, vegetable growers do. You know a vegetable grower, he's injecting his uric acid all the time. And he's buying that regularly because he's drip irrigating. He can't tolerate any lack of performance in these strippers. So he's constantly cleaning out these carbonates in his system, this particulate and the scum that develops because of the lime buildup on the emitters. You do it every once in a while, every season, to do the same thing for the same reason. And what that calcium carbonate is that you're attacking there is lime. It's basically lime water forming lime deposits on your irrigation system. So that's a nuisance already you've known about for a long time. It's also a greater nuisance or effect on the tree that we haven't really appreciated. Well, some of the other things that calcium carbonate does is that it makes phosphate more available. It, again, the way it interacts with the carbonates allows the phosphates to become more liberated as phosphate, and actually that can be a bad thing too, because it's knocking phosphate off your soils in an available form. That phosphate can leach. We know that phosphate in water can cause a lot of pollution problems. So again, carbonate is not a good thing in terms of that. So how do you deal with the pH, the carbonate issues as a fertilization approach? What you buy, what you apply? Well, historically, we've talked about lime as the way to supply calcium. It's a way to supply magnesium, dolomite lime. So that's been like the guiding principle for the last 50 years. So to have me or anybody else stand up here and tell you, well, liming can be bad because you're adding too many carbonates into the system is like heresy. It's like attacking something we all do with our money that we make at the end of the season, our profit. We use that to buy some lime to get our pH up and make an investment in that ground for the future. Well, the carbonates, whether they're from the water or in the soil already as lime, and I would say over-liming, is what I'm talking about here. I'm actually attacking the process of liming to a high enough set point that you're actually causing these problems with the roots and the tree, is that you've got to be very careful now about using lime. And you might just think that of lime as something that, along with the water and the treatment of the water, is something you just don't want to do anymore. You don't want to add any more carbonate into the system as you can. You're trying to remove the carbonate, the bicarbonate, and get rid of it. And the ways you can do that, I think you're familiar with, is by lowering the pH. And an easy way to do that, or a way that's convenient, if not very immediate in its effect, is prilled sulfur. Prilled sulfur is a method where you add it, and with that sulfur breakdown and microbial degradation, it produces protons, produces H+, which you deal with to knock the calcium carbonate apart, to neutralize the alkalinity, the OH, and the other things that are alkalinizing your soil, alkalizing your soil. And in a more direct way that this has been attacked here in Florida, and I'll cite Brian Belcher probably more than once, is to actually attack it with acidification of irrigation water. So you can attack it at the soil level by dropping the pH with something like prilled sulfur and other sulfur-based compounds, or you can attack it by acidifying the water, and there's lots of different ways to do that. We can have a whole discussion on practical implementation of what I'm talking about today, and we could continue on with that after I give my talk on the HLB interactions, but that's not what I'm expert in. I would refer to those questions to Brian or experts that work with soil and water quality and treatment of it. Okay, so I'm getting repetitive here because I can't emphasize enough how much carbonate screws up things. And the best evidence of that is called iron chlorosis. And it's not just citrus, it's all crops. When you irrigate with high bicarbonate water, we learned in California when we went on a tour in February, that isn't just citrus. This is all crops that you see on the landscape there in the Central Valley. That is pistachios, almonds, almost all the fruit trees in the area that are grown on these high bicarbonate-containing soils and water quality areas, they use acid. They attack the irrigation water with acid because all the trees, all the varieties of crops in the neighborhood are all turning yellow. They're turning yellow because, again, what carbonate does is screw up the ability of the tree to take up not only just cations like calcium and magnesium and potassium, but also iron. And that's the most classic way that calcium carbonate screws up trees. Screws up citrus trees and other crops. So iron chlorosis. If you have an iron chlorosis problem, you go out and you spray foliar iron. That's the traditional way to attack that. Well, that's not the way that you should be attacking it now. You should look at that as a sign that you have all these issues in your soil, in your water. You're not attacking iron by applying iron to the foliage anymore. You're attacking it by controlling the water's carbonate levels and getting the pH of the soil down. So you're not just treating the symptoms here. You're trying to fundamentally change the rhizosphere where the roots grow and how well they take up water and nutrients. And the evidence for just how nasty this all is that you have actual measurements of the effect of calcium carbonate on all kinds of different plants, crops, and citrus as well. And I'll cite here some work by Bill Castle, who actually measured the effect of carbonate on different rootstocks. So what it does is that it screws up the amount of iron that gets in, causes the trees to turn yellow. But when the tree is yellow, that tells you that it's not producing enough photosynthate, doing a good enough job. And I've already talked in enough meetings now to tell you that HLB is a carbohydrate starvation disease. So if you're not producing as many carbohydrates as you can, if your trees are yellow, they're not performing at maximum carbohydrate producing capacity. So the next page that I'm looking at here now is the impact of carbonates on citrus rootstocks. Again, one of the major take-home messages today. Talked about measuring the water, measuring the pH of the root zone. Know what rootstock you're dealing with here, because rootstocks vary from good, tolerable, tolerating carbonate to can't tolerate it at all. Best case would be something like Clio or Thauer. Worst case, and even by far, if you go to the publication, you can see the chart that charts the amount of effect on root growth on these different rootstocks. Swingle is far and away the worst. Well, that's what most of you have. But if you don't have Swingle, you have Carrizo. That's the second worst. That's somewhere in the middle of the effect on different rootstocks. So why have we started talking differently about carbonate in both soil and water? Because you're on different rootstocks than you were 30 years ago when I first came here. You have to deal with what you got out there in terms of rootstocks to know where to set the pH. And we've recommended, as an organization, UF, overliming. 6.8 is the set point now. It should have been adjusted down to 6.2 with our modern rootstocks. We could tolerate that lack of adjustment or lack of spreading the word, getting the knowledge out there that that's the case, but now we can't because we have HLB effects on root growth and ability of that root system to work. So that is a really important lesson. Don't forget that. The Swingle is the worst. I probably don't need to say that too many times because you already know that groves that are most likely in trouble already on these rootstocks, and maybe the groves on Clio are doing a little better. Well, I think this explains a lot. And not to just say that this explains everything, folks. Don't go out of this meeting thinking that I know everything. We explain everything with carbonate. Is that, rootstocks like Clio are doing better. I get those reports from you. I have those eyewitness reports myself. There's a reason for that, and that's because of this carbonate interaction, at least in part. So I'm going to switch gears now to HLB, and I've given a lot of this kind of talk in several places, so I'm repeating myself to some of you, I know, and maybe some of this is worth repeating, maybe some of it's kind of, you already have heard it, you already know it, but the effect of HLB on our groves is just increasing to a level that, we've reached the intolerable level in terms of how the trees are reacting. They're so infected, there's so many infected that we're starting to see fruit on the ground. And is that something related specifically to what has happened in 2012, late 2012, or into 2013? And does it affect one variety more than another, one area of Florida more than another? The answer is no to all those things. This is a challenging year with climate as much as it's been in the past in terms of droughts, cold, This is no more challenging than the previous season, so to say that that's the reason for the additional fruit drop doesn't satisfy me. What does satisfy me, however, is, this is real. It's in 4 down estimates downward of the crop estimate 4. So we know that's real. We know that's something we've never seen before. The amount of fruit on the ground is unprecedented. We know that's real. I have some pictures there of trees with dropped fruit. I don't think you need to see those or look at those for very long because you all have those in every neighborhood. So what's happening with these trees that they drop fruit? Again, we've talked about climatic issues. We've talked about cycles. Citrus trees do cycle from one year to the other. We could talk about cycles, but I want to talk about how we know that HLB bacterium infects, how quickly it damages the tree and where, and then what effect that would have on fruit drop. And that is the bacterium, although it's introduced through the leaves by the psyllid, goes all the way to the roots first. And the reason is that the phloem goes down as well as up, and it goes down, it cycles up and down many times during the season, not just in the fall, but mostly in the fall. That strongest push down of the carbohydrates is in the fall. And that's when you have your biggest root flush on the tree, and that's where when we teach you to treat with Rinomil and other pesticides on root flushes, you target the fall flush. But that's happening several times a year, several times a season. Well, the bacterium follows the food. If the carbohydrates going down, that's what it eats, that's where it goes. It follows it. Well, not surprisingly, except if you thought that everything was happening above ground, because that's where all the damage that you see is that the damage below ground that we've measured in all age trees and all parts of the industry on well-managed groves is that damage occurs first below the ground. The roots are disappearing before you even see any effect on the top of the tree. And that's astounding. In my way of looking at it as a root biologist, that's astounding. For you, it means that the tree is already pretty well damaged, pretty extensively damaged before you even see any evidence above the ground of any effect to the disease. And here's really the key point here is that the bacterium, once it gets into the roots, it grows there, it likes it there, it moves freely around in the root system. It's not doing what scientists have told you it's doing in the shoot system when they're talking about, well, we can't recover it from this shoot, but we can recover it from that shoot. It's compartmentalized, it's sectoring in the tree. Well, that doesn't happen in the root system. It goes everywhere in the root system because the root system's not getting plugged. The shoot system's getting plugged within weeks and months of the infection. Below ground, it's moving, having its way and doing its thing and growing as well as in the top. So the bad news is that all this damage, all this moving around of the bacterium is occurring, again, before you see very much damage above the ground. And worse news, and I have to can't thank Davis Management, Citrus Management, and Magnolia Consulting for sharing this crop loss data, because it's basically among just a few data sets that we have statewide to let us know what the implications of this root loss is. Because it's one thing for me to tell you that there's 30 or 40% less roots, and you go, well, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. No other pest or pathogen I've worked on has that kind of an effect on roots, Phytophthora, nematodes, even Diaprepes, on the feeder roots, that is. And no other impact of any of these diseases or pests has this effect on crop loss that I'm showing you here in this table. Now, this table is mixed news, bad news, good news. Well, the bad news is that the crop loss that we measure is similar to that of the root loss, and that's not surprising because we've seen that equation with other diseases and pests. That's not surprising. But what is good news here is that this crop loss is not increasing with time. Now, you could argue that some of those healthy trees that are used in these comparisons of 10 with and 10 without, that some of those are getting sicker with time, and that's true. So maybe the differences aren't increasing with time because of that. They're both getting a little sicker with time, so the difference is not increasing, but it's staying the same. But I'm the optimist here. I want to say that if you well manage your groves, best you know how up to this point, and in this case being an example, that you're stabilizing the trees' root loss and crop loss, and that they're, again, related to one another. Although we measured 45% less roots in the 2010 or 2011 measurement of one of those blocks, the Carrizo block, and that sounds like a lot, it could be, I guess the news could be worse and the crop loss could say that as well. But what I see here is some benefit from your investment of water, nutrients, management practices in stabilizing and maintaining the health of the trees in the best case. Maybe not all cases, but the best case. Best case of management, that is. Maybe not the best case of carbonates and soil and so forth, but best case of management. So what about this high carbonate in water and soil? How do you attack it? I've kind of referred to that some already. But let's get really pointed about what I have seen with Brian Belcher in their grows to say that high pH water, high carbonate water is not good in terms of tree health, and HLB expression is greater than in those situations than it is where pH is lower. Carbonates are lower in the water, and carbonates in the soil are lower because the pH is lower. So these are the real important observations. I don't bring any data today. Barbara said I bring data. I don't bring data. I bring observations that we've come behind Brian to lead us to grows, to make measurements of what the HLB looks like in these grows. And I think what it looks like is kind of like what he said. I can see differences here. And I said, Brian, if you can see them, I can measure them. So what have we measured? We've seen differences in HLB expression, big differences in HLB expression in grows side by side, all other things being equal. All other things being equal, except the water. So we're saying that the carbonate in the water is bad. Well, here's the evidence that it's bad in terms of HLB expression. Well, that's again, that's the elephant in the room we need to manage. Again, worse yet, if you want to deliver even more bad news, that we measured a difference in fibrous root in these two conditions that said that this carbonate effect may be even adding to the root loss or the root health problem that the HLB has already started. So no wonder the trees are expressing more HLB symptoms in terms of overall appearance and yield is being looked at in these blocks very, very closely to see if that follows. But the roots are getting hurt again by the carbonate in the water. Well, that was the first observation that Brian led us to. Second observation he brought to my attention showed me just very recently, within the last month, is a very interesting block with an interesting history that is unique, but it's instructive, and that is in this block of grapefruit in the north half, high copper in the soil. You take out the old grapefruit grove, it was an old Sebring packing house grove, and you come in, the first thing you do is dolomite to control copper. That's what we do when we deal with copper toxicity. That's the recommendation. The south half of the block, it was Valencia's. That received dolomite sometime in the past, like all groves, but hadn't been dolomited recently. So if you look at that nice color rendering from the report that they get back, you see a nice difference in color and distribution of pH in that northern block and that southern block. So it's like high pH, low pH. Again, it's a dichotomy. It's like this water quality, high carbonate, low carbonate well water. This is the high pH, high line versus lower pH, lower line. And I'm showing you pHs there that are below the so-called set point that's been recommended in the past in the southern block. In the northern part of the block, much higher than, I would say, overliming has occurred there. Okay, again, there we have the dichotomy. Well, let's look at what that means and do some observations or follow Brian around where he's made these observations and draw your attention to, again, HLB expression. In not solid blocks, the northern block was replanted solid block. Southern block was reset as a old Valencia block that was plugged in with trees. But Brian says these are the same generation trees, same nursery, same planting time. But look at the pH differences that I've brought to your attention in that previous slide. And look at the pHs of where these trees are in this block in relation to that map. And again, I think you see a really large dichotomy in the way the trees are behaving in terms of their growth, productivity. And the biggest thing of all is that in the right-hand part of that slide is all the fruit have been harvested off the trees, and what has not been harvested is on the ground. And on the left-hand side, the fruit are still on the tree, and there's very few fruit on the ground. Now, you might argue that we picked worst case and best case, and I won't tell you that I spent a lot of time just getting the right comparison, but you can see very different tree health for a long time has occurred in these two conditions. So it's not something that just happened overnight. So I can't talk all day here, and we can't talk too much about the next step, but we're on a huge learning curve with this, and that is how you attack the carbonates in the water and how you attack the carbonates in the soil. Well, there's some obvious things you can do, but we haven't done them in the past here in Florida. They're doing them in California over thousands of acres. This is Paramount Citrus that we visited in Central Valley, South Central Valley. And they do this for all crops over thousands of acres on a scale that got your attention, that this is a real problem in citriculture and agriculture in general. And that is the water quality issue. So when we got back to Florida, from what we learned, on the